James sat at his desk, staring at the glowing screen of his laptop. The meeting had ended, but the tension lingered like a shadow. His hands trembled slightly as he closed the laptop with a loud snap. "Why does this always happen to me?" he muttered under his breath. For as long as he could remember, James had struggled with anger and frustration. Not the kind that comes occasionally, but a fire that erupted instantly whenever things went wrong. A wrong comment from a colleague, a rude customer, or even a delay in traffic could ignite his temper. And the worst part? He often regretted it later. At work, James was competent, even talented, but his impulsive reactions often overshadowed his skills. Once, during a team meeting, a colleague accidentally criticized a report he had worked on for days. Without thinking, James snapped back, his voice rising. The room went silent. That day, his manager had pulled him aside and said, "James, your work is excellent, but your reactions, they're holding you back." Even outside of work, his reactions caused friction. A simple disagreement with a friend could turn into a heated argument. Social media was worse. One negative comment on a post, and James' fingers would start typing before his brain could intervene. Words he later wished he could take back were out there forever. Despite all this, James wasn't a bad person. Deep down, he was kind, empathetic, and genuinely wanted to live a peaceful life. But there was one problem. He didn't know how to control his reactions. And in today's fast-paced world, where everyone seemed to have an opinion, this was becoming a serious challenge. One Friday evening, after another frustrating day, James walked home slowly. The streets were crowded, the city buzzing with life, but he felt trapped in his own emotions. He replayed every argument, every word that had hurt him, every reaction he had regretted. "Why can't I just stay calm?" he whispered. It was at that moment, in the quiet of the city's evening glow, that he realized something. It wasn't the people around him or the situations he faced that were the problem. The real problem was him. His reactions were automatic, like a reflex, and they were controlling his life. James had heard the phrase before, "You cannot control what happens to you, but you can control how you respond." He had nodded when someone said it, but he had never truly understood it, until now. For the first time, he felt a spark of curiosity, maybe even hope. "I need to change," he said softly to himself. "I need to learn the power of not reacting." Little did James know, this decision would start a journey that would transform his life completely. From frustration to peace, from impulsive anger to thoughtful responses, James' journey would teach him one of life's most powerful lessons: the power of choosing your response instead of reacting automatically. As he entered his apartment and looked at his reflection in the mirror, he saw a man tired, worn out, but also ready for change. And deep inside, he felt a quiet determination. Something had shifted that evening. A tiny seed had been planted. A seed that would grow slowly but surely into a life-changing habit of calmness, patience, and power. The following Monday, James arrived at work feeling a mix of anticipation and anxiety. The weekend had given him time to reflect, but he knew that old habits didn't change overnight. He was determined, however, to take the first step. As he walked into the office, he noticed Mr. Adrian, a senior colleague with a reputation for calmness, wisdom, and an almost magnetic presence. Unlike most people in the office who rushed, argued, or complained, Adrian seemed untouched by the chaos around him. His desk was organized, his emails calm and polite, and his tone gentle, even when correcting mistakes. James remembered something a friend had once told him: "If you want to learn patience, spend time with those who have it." Perhaps this was his chance. During lunch, James gathered his courage and approached Adrian. "Excuse me, sir. I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said nervously. Adrian looked up with a warm smile. "Not at all, James. Sit down." What's on your mind? James hesitated. How do you tell someone that you can't control your anger? Finally, he blurted out, I get angry so easily. At work, at people. I react before I think, and it's ruining my life. I don't know how to stop. Adrian leaned back, his eyes thoughtful. The fire of reaction, he said softly. Many people think life's challenges are the problem, but actually the challenge is within us, in how we respond. James listened intently. Every word seemed to pierce through the fog of his frustration. Adrian continued, let me tell you something important. Reacting is a habit just like breathing. But unlike breathing, we can train ourselves to pause, to think, and to choose our response. That pause, that moment, is where your power lies. James frowned slightly. A pause? How can a pause help? If I don't react, won't people think I'm weak? Adrian smiled. Not at all. Strength isn't shown by how loudly you respond, but by how thoughtfully you act. A calm person controls the situation without fighting it. Anger is easy. Control is hard and powerful. For the first time, James felt a glimmer of hope. He wasn't alone. There was a way to change. Adrian leaned closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. Here's the first lesson. When you feel the urge to react, take a deep breath. Count to 10. Observe your emotion without judgment. Ask yourself, what is the best response, not the fastest response? Practice this and you'll see the difference. James nodded slowly, committing the words to memory. It sounded simple, almost too simple. But he sensed there was depth to it, a skill he could use to transform his life. The next few days, James tried Adrian's method. The first attempt came during a team meeting. A colleague criticized his report in a harsh tone, expecting James to lash out. Instead, James felt the familiar surge of anger, and then he paused. He counted to 10 silently, took a deep breath, and responded calmly. Thank you for the feedback. I'll review my report and see where improvements can be made. The room went quiet for a moment. The colleague blinked, surprised, and then nodded. All right. Sounds good. James felt a quiet satisfaction that he hadn't felt before. He realized something profound. Not reacting didn't mean giving in. It meant taking control. That evening he wrote in his journal, "Today I paused instead of exploding." It felt powerful. I didn't lose control, I gained it. Maybe this is the beginning. Adrian's lesson had opened a door. But James knew the real journey had just begun. Learning to not react in every situation would take practice, patience, and perseverance. It wouldn't be easy. But for the first time, James felt ready to walk through that door. The next week, James decided to put Adrian's advice into practice. He knew it wouldn't be easy, old habits die hard, but he was determined to make a start. The first test came on Monday morning. His usual rush hour commute was chaotic. Cars honked, motorbikes weaved through traffic, and a driver suddenly cut him off. His first instinct was to honk furiously and yell. But then Adrian's words echoed in his mind. Pause. Count to 10. Observe, don't react. James gritted his teeth, breathed deeply, and allowed the driver to go. It was a small victory, but he felt lighter, calmer, almost free. At work, he faced more tests. During a meeting, a colleague interrupted him rudely while he was presenting. The old James would have snapped, maybe even slammed his notebook. But this time he paused. He remembered Adrian's advice. Observe the emotion, choose the response. Thank you for your input, James said calmly. I'll clarify my point again to avoid confusion. The colleague looked slightly surprised, then nodded. James felt a wave of pride, not from being right, but from staying in control. Yet the journey wasn't all smooth. Later that afternoon, a client sent a harsh email, blaming James for a minor mistake he hadn't made. The old James would have typed a furious reply immediately, but he paused, recalling the lesson. He stepped away from his desk, made a cup of tea, and waited. After 10 minutes, he drafted a polite, professional email. "Thank you for your feedback. I will review the matter carefully and ensure the issue is resolved promptly." James hit send. No shouting, no blaming. And to his surprise, the client replied politely, appreciating his calm approach. It was a small but powerful victory, a real-world example of how not reacting could turn conflict into resolution. Even outside work, James faced challenges. His younger brother teased him relentlessly at home, pushing all his buttons. The old James would have shouted or snapped back. This time he took a deep breath and smiled instead. "It's just your way of joking, right?" James said lightly. His brother blinked, surprised at the unexpected calm. James felt a quiet sense of mastery, realizing that controlling his reaction changed the energy of the interaction. By the end of the week, James was noticing subtle changes. He wasn't perfect. There were moments he slipped and reacted impulsively, but each small success strengthened his belief. He began to journal his experiences, noting what triggered him, how he paused, and the outcomes of his calm responses. One evening he wrote, "Today, I didn't react when a coworker criticized me unfairly. Instead, I listened, took notes, and responded respectfully. I felt powerful." Control isn't about suppressing emotion, it's about directing it wisely. Adrian noticed the change. During their weekly check-in, he smiled at James. "I see progress," he said. "Remember, small wins lead to bigger victories. Each time you choose not to react, you're training your mind for life." James nodded. He understood now that this journey was not about perfection but progress. Every time he paused, reflected, and responded thoughtfully, he was building a new habit, one that could change not just his reactions but his life. He also started noticing another truth: the world responded differently to him. People who once seemed critical or aggressive began to respect his calmness. Arguments that might have escalated now resolved smoothly. Even stressful situations felt manageable. James felt a quiet joy he hadn't experienced before. Not the loud happiness of instant gratification, but a deeper, steadier satisfaction. He was learning the power of patience, observation, and mindful choice, the very foundation of not reacting. And as he lay in bed that night, reflecting on his week, he realized something profound. His reactions didn't control him anymore, he controlled them. A few weeks had passed since James first met Adrian, and the small victories were piling up. But the real test was yet to come. Life, as always, had a way of presenting challenges when he felt most confident. It began on a Monday morning. James walked into the office, greeted by the usual buzz of voices and clattering keyboards. But today there was tension in the air. A major project he had been leading for months had hit a serious snag. A colleague, Mark, had made a critical mistake, and the blame was quickly being pinned on James. Instantly, James felt the familiar surge of anger. His heart raced, his fists clenched, and a wave of frustration threatened to spill out. The old James would have shouted, argued, or even stormed out of the room. But then he remembered Adrian's words. Pause. Observe. Choose your response. James inhaled deeply. He counted to 10 in his mind, feeling the tension in his chest slowly loosen. He reminded himself, this is not about proving who is right or wrong. It's about handling the situation wisely. When his manager, Miss Thompson, approached him, her tone sharp, he smiled faintly. James, this mistake has cost us valuable time. Can you explain what happened? James took a steady breath. I understand the impact, ma'am, he said calmly. After reviewing the details, it appears that Mark's step in the process caused the issue. However, I've already prepared a solution to ensure we meet our deadline." The room went silent. Colleagues who expected an angry outburst were surprised by his composure. Miss Thompson nodded approvingly. "Thank you, James. Your response is professional. Implement the solution immediately." Inside, James felt a surge of satisfaction. By not reacting, he had avoided conflict, earned respect, and even taken control of the situation. But the test didn't stop there. Later that week, a friend called him to discuss a personal matter. The friend unfairly criticized James, attacking his decisions and questioning his integrity. Normally, James would have responded defensively, perhaps even cut ties. This time he paused. He listened without interruption, absorbing every word without letting emotions dictate his response. After a moment he spoke. "I appreciate your perspective. I understand why you feel that way. Let's discuss how we can move forward constructively." The friend, caught off guard by James' calmness, softened. They continued the conversation productively instead of spiraling into an argument. James realized something important. Not reacting doesn't mean ignoring problems, it means approaching them with clarity and control. The next test came unexpectedly online. While browsing social media, James saw a post criticizing his company, with comments implying incompetence on his part. His instinct was to respond immediately, defending himself aggressively. But instead he paused. He wrote nothing, closed the page, and reflected. Later, he drafted a carefully worded response that was professional, respectful, and factual. Not only did it avoid escalating the situation, but it also earned him praise from colleagues and friends for his measured approach. James began to notice a pattern. The world responds differently when you don't react impulsively. Situations that once caused chaos now became opportunities to demonstrate composure and wisdom. However, the journey was not without struggle. There were moments of temptation, when a rude client pushed every button, or when traffic and noise tested his patience. Each time, James had to consciously pause, observe his feelings, and decide how to respond. Sometimes he slipped. He lost his cool. But he reminded himself, mastery is built over time through persistence. Every pause, every mindful choice made him stronger. By the end of the month, James had faced multiple real-life challenges. Each test reinforced the same truth Adrian had taught him. Power lies not in reacting quickly, but in responding thoughtfully. The habit of pausing had become his shield, his tool, and his new source of strength. James' journey was evolving. He was no longer a prisoner of his emotions. Instead, he was learning to guide them, using each experience as a lesson in calmness, control, and personal growth. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when James faced the biggest challenge of his journey so far. The office was tense, deadlines loomed, nerves frayed, and tempers flared. James had been working tirelessly on a high-stakes project for weeks. It was critical for the company, and all eyes were on him. Suddenly, disaster struck. A critical part of the project failed due to an unexpected error. His colleague, Mark, who had already made previous mistakes, immediately blamed James in front of the entire team. Voices rose, fingers pointed, and the atmosphere crackled with tension. James felt the familiar surge of anger rising within him. His first instinct was to shout, defend himself, even walk out in frustration. Every fiber of his body screamed to react. His heart raced, his hands clenched, and a storm of words formed in his mind. But then he felt the quiet echo of Adrian's words. Pause. Observe. Choose your response. He inhaled deeply. 1, 2, 3. The anger was still there, but the pause gave him space. Instead of reacting, he observed. He noticed his racing thoughts, his clenched jaw, the heat in his chest, and accepted it. He allowed himself to feel the emotion without letting it control him. Then he made a choice. He would respond, not react. James stood up slowly, meeting the eyes of the room calmly. His voice was steady even in the chaos. "Mark, I understand you're frustrated. Let's review what happened together and find a solution, rather than blaming each other." A few colleagues looked shocked. They expected a defensive outburst, perhaps a loud argument. But instead, James' calm presence shifted the energy in the room. People paused, took a breath, and listened. He continued, "I've already analyzed the error and have a plan to fix it. Let's work together to implement it and ensure this project succeeds." The room grew quiet. The tension that had felt suffocating began to dissipate. Mark, seeing James' composure, felt a pang of guilt and nodded reluctantly. "All right, let's do that," he said quietly. James felt a wave of relief and satisfaction, but it was deeper than that, a profound sense of empowerment. He had faced his biggest test yet and mastered his reaction. He hadn't let anger or pride dictate his actions. Instead, he had chosen calm, clarity, and constructive response. Later that day, Adrian stopped by his desk. He smiled knowingly. "I saw what happened in the meeting," he said. "That was impressive, James. Remember this feeling. This is the power of not reacting. It doesn't just prevent conflict, it creates respect, influence, and control over your life." James nodded, a subtle smile forming on his lips. For the first time, he truly understood. Not reacting wasn't just about avoiding mistakes. It was about transforming challenges into opportunities, turning conflict into collaboration. That night, as James walked home under the gentle patter of rain, he reflected on the day. He realized something important. His reactions had shaped his past, but his choices now could shape his future. Every situation, no matter how tense or unfair, could be handled with composure. And in that composure lay true power. He journaled his thoughts. "Today I faced my biggest challenge yet. I wanted to explode, to prove myself, to react. But I paused. I observed. I chose my response. And the outcome was better than I could have imagined." This is the power of not reacting, and it's life-changing. James smiled as he closed his journal. This was the turning point, the moment when his understanding moved from theory to practice. From now on, his reactions would no longer control him. He was learning to control himself, and in doing so, he was mastering his life. Weeks turned into months, and James noticed a profound change within himself. The chaos of life still existed. Deadlines, difficult colleagues, traffic jams, and disagreements were part of his daily routine. But something fundamental had shifted. James no longer reacted impulsively. He responded thoughtfully, choosing calm over anger and action over rashness. At work, this change was undeniable. Colleagues who once hesitated to collaborate with him now sought his guidance. During heated discussions, James' calm demeanor allowed for constructive dialogue. Decisions were made faster, conflicts resolved smoother, and his leadership subtly became more influential. One day, during a project review, a senior manager praised James openly. "Your composure under pressure is remarkable," she said. "Even in stressful situations, you lead with clarity and calmness. This sets a standard for the entire team." James felt a quiet pride. This recognition wasn't about his skills alone, it was about his ability to control his reactions. For the first time, he understood the truth Adrian had tried to convey all along. Calmness is a superpower. Even in his personal life, the transformation was evident. Arguments with friends no longer escalated. Misunderstandings with his younger brother became moments of gentle guidance instead of tension. Social media, once a source of instant anger, became a place where James could respond thoughtfully or simply observe without engaging. One evening, James sat with Adrian over coffee. "I feel different," he admitted. "I'm calmer, more focused, and I notice people respond to me differently too. But sometimes I still feel the old anger lurking beneath the surface." Adrian smiled knowingly. "And that's perfectly normal. Mastery doesn't mean the feeling disappears. It means you choose how to act despite the feeling. You're not suppressing anger. You're directing it wisely. That's true control." James nodded, understanding at a deeper level. His journey wasn't about being emotionless. It was about transforming emotional energy into thoughtful action. Every pause, every breath, every measured response was a step toward inner freedom. Even small daily moments carried weight. When a rude customer raised their voice at him in a cafe, James simply smiled and replied calmly. When traffic snarled around him, he reminded himself that anger wouldn't help. When a colleague criticized his work unfairly, he listened, acknowledged, and responded with constructive solutions. These consistent actions built a new reality. James realized that life no longer controlled him, he controlled life. He was no longer a slave to immediate reactions. Instead, he had learned a powerful truth. The world responds to calmness with respect, and calmness creates clarity in chaos. One weekend, James reflected on the journey in his journal. "Months ago, I was a prisoner of my emotions. Anger controlled my days and frustration dictated my life. Today, I feel powerful, not because I dominate situations, but because I choose my responses. I have learned the art of pause, the strength in calmness, and the freedom in self-mastery." He smiled, sipping his coffee. This mastery wasn't the end of the journey, it was a new beginning. Every challenge ahead would be an opportunity to practice, every frustration a chance to strengthen his calm. James had transformed, not into someone perfect, but into someone who could face life's storms with inner peace, wisdom, and strength. And with this transformation, he felt ready to share his lessons with others, helping them discover the power he had found. After months of consistent practice, James realized that his journey was no longer just about himself. The calm, clarity, and confidence he had developed weren't meant to remain private. They were tools, powerful ones, that could help others navigate the chaos of life. One afternoon, James was approached by a junior colleague, Lily, who seemed tense and frustrated. "James, I just lost my temper in a meeting and now everyone's upset with me. I don't know how to handle it," she confessed. James smiled gently. He recognized the feeling all too well. "Lily, I understand exactly how you feel. I used to be like that myself," he said. "But I learned a method that changed everything. It's called the power of not reacting." He invited her to sit and explain the principles Adrian had taught him. 1. Pause. Take a deep breath before responding. 2. Observe. Notice your emotions without judgment. 3. Choose. Decide the most constructive way to respond, not the quickest. 4. Practice. Apply this consistently in daily life. James shared examples from his own life. The stressful meetings, the rude colleagues, the online conflicts, showing Lily how staying calm had turned potential disasters into opportunities for growth. "Let me show you a small exercise," James said. "Next time you feel anger rising, pause and count to 10. Focus on your breath and ask yourself, what response will create the best outcome?" Over the next few weeks, James mentored several colleagues and friends. Each time, he watched as they struggled initially, but gradually they began to notice the effects. Arguments became less frequent, conversations more productive, and even stressful situations were handled with clarity. At home, he shared the lessons with his younger brother. Instead of scolding him for mistakes or teasing, James taught him to pause, think, and respond thoughtfully. The transformation was subtle but noticeable. The house felt calmer, more understanding, and less reactive. James also started using social media differently. Rather than engaging in heated arguments, he wrote thoughtful, constructive posts that inspired others to pause and reflect. Followers reached out to thank him, saying his calm approach had changed the way they dealt with conflicts in their own lives. Through mentoring, James realized a profound truth. Teaching others reinforced his own mastery. Every time he explained the power of not reacting, he deepened his understanding, strengthened his habits, and extended the impact beyond himself. One evening, James reflected in his journal. "I thought mastering my reactions would change my life alone. But the real power is multiplied when shared. Helping others discover calmness, control, and clarity is even more rewarding than experiencing it myself." The power of not reacting isn't just personal, it's transformational for everyone around you. By spreading the lesson, James had become a quiet force in his community, a living example of how calmness and thoughtful response can reshape relationships, workplaces, and even society. His journey had come full circle. From being someone controlled by anger and impulsive reactions, he had grown into a mentor, a guide, and a source of inspiration. And every day he continued to practice, knowing that mastery is not a final destination but a lifelong journey. James sat quietly in his apartment, the soft evening light spilling through the window. It had been months since he first began learning the power of not reacting, and looking back, the transformation amazed him. The anger, frustration, and impulsive reactions that once ruled his life were no longer in control. He opened his journal and began reflecting on the lessons he had learned. 1. Pause before reacting. The first and most crucial step was simply pausing. James realized that in the split second before responding, there was a choice that could either escalate conflict or create harmony. Every time he paused, he gained clarity and power. 2. Observe your emotions without judgment. Feeling anger or frustration is natural. The lesson wasn't to suppress these emotions, but to observe them. By acknowledging his feelings without letting them dictate his actions, James discovered freedom. Awareness became his anchor in moments of chaos. 3. Choose thoughtful responses over instant reactions. Reacting impulsively often led to regret. Choosing a measured, thoughtful response brought respect, understanding, and better outcomes. James learned that strength isn't shown by the loudest voice but by the calmest presence. 4. Practice makes mastery. Change didn't happen overnight. James slipped, reacted impulsively at times, and faced setbacks. But he remembered Adrian's wisdom. Mastery is built over time through consistent practice, patience, and persistence. Each small victory reinforced his habit and strengthened his resolve. 5. Calmness is contagious. One of the most profound lessons was that calmness spreads. By choosing not to react, James influenced others. Colleagues, friends, family, and even strangers. Situations that once spiraled into conflict now resolved peacefully. Your calm can change the energy of a room, a conversation, or even a life. 6. Sharing the lesson amplifies its power. As James mentored others, he realized that teaching reinforced his mastery. Sharing wisdom not only helped others grow but also solidified his own understanding. The journey became greater than personal achievement. It became transformational for everyone around him. James closed his journal and smiled. He understood that life would always present challenges, difficult people, unexpected setbacks, and moments that test patience. But now he had a tool more powerful than anger or impulse, the ability to choose his response. He whispered to himself, a mantra he now lived by. I may not control what happens to me, but I control how I respond. In every pause there is power. In every choice there is freedom. I am not a slave to my emotions. I am the master of my reactions. This was more than a personal victory, it was a life philosophy. And as he reflected, James knew that anyone could achieve the same transformation. The power of not reacting wasn't reserved for the wise or the patient. It was available to anyone willing to practice, pause, and choose. For viewers watching this journey, the message was clear. Every reaction is a choice. Every choice shapes your life. Master this skill and you master your world. The months of practice, reflection, and patience had transformed James in ways he could never have imagined. He wasn't just calmer, he was stronger, wiser, and more in control of his life than ever before. What had once seemed like a simple idea, the power of not reacting, had become a guiding principle, shaping every interaction, every decision, and every challenge he faced. James sat by his window, the city lights flickering like stars. He thought about his journey, the heated arguments, the stressful meetings, the moments of frustration that had once consumed him. Each of those experiences had been a teacher, guiding him toward mastery over his reactions. He knew now that life would always present tests. People who push buttons, situations that frustrate, circumstances beyond control. But the difference was this: he no longer gave away his power to external events or emotions. James reflected on the lessons he had learned and the truths he wanted to share with anyone listening. 1. Your reaction is your choice. No matter the provocation, the insult, or the challenge, you always have a choice. You can react impulsively and lose control, or you can pause and respond thoughtfully, creating outcomes that serve you and those around you. 2. Calmness is strength. Real strength is not loud or aggressive. It is quiet, steady, and unshakable. By remaining calm, you command respect, clarity, and influence, qualities that anger can never produce. 3. Patience and practice lead to mastery. Change doesn't happen overnight. The habit of not reacting is built slowly, one conscious choice at a time. Celebrate small victories, learn from setbacks, and remember that persistence transforms behavior into character. 4. Sharing your growth multiplies its power. The lessons you learn for yourself can inspire others. Teaching, mentoring, or simply modeling calmness spreads the impact far beyond your own life. Your calm can create calm, your composure can inspire composure, and your thoughtful responses can change the energy of a room or a life. James smiled as he wrote his final journal entry. I am no longer a prisoner of my emotions. I am the master of my reactions. The world may challenge me, but I hold the key to how I respond. Every pause, every breath, every thoughtful choice is my power. And this power is available to anyone who chooses to use it. To viewers watching this journey, James had a message. You may not control everything that happens to you, but you can always control your response. Your calm is your strength. Your response is your power. Master it and you master your life. As James closed his journal and looked out at the city, he knew that his journey would continue, not because he had reached perfection, but because life is a series of moments, each an opportunity to choose wisely. And with every choice made with calm, clarity, and purpose, the power of not reacting became not just a lesson, but a way of life.